saglesetse yeah arbi saglesetse itar sabinse wada damar taxi wacha yeah bexar bazi samsa somze god me tafar soke somze antar apa soke killa isne killa tike itse wache songa kar sokte songa sokte diştegine gail babo diştegine bargad babo diştegine side babo irar diştegine seki babo irar diştegine beye babo irar diştegine baka babo irar diştegine oba babo irar diştegine laide babo irar diştegine goze babo iwa goisi yatka arit diştegine oh no yeah what they are Deda, box deda, betche gets there, it's dead, Caltonta, Good Monte, Kezanola Kezo, Adistagere, Arie, Adri Agere, what they are, Nada. Anda pati, anchina yewa, anda tinti. Ada, ije matau, ije mi malesu, andim neger yelle. Ada, mertu zari, inkardadi, mano yalo. Minno, yamdir siranji, yas ayiki, besu petsinko. Zara ya tzedki, basufut cinco. Zara ya tzedki, miatbatele, mitargatele, semaineya, abet mamara. Wayne mide, wayne mide, ne kanchi, anchi kene, fikar tafa. Eya andu apate adamondime ada wanda pate anchina yewa andu atinte oh mata inem keza mata anchim keza matash antem keza mata mal ingapa what there susmio wane gina dishtagina arit dishtagina kheshmi setse
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you can see my screen now. All right. Welcome, everybody. If you don't know my name by now, my name is Marianne Dreas-Sheka, and I'm the team leader and management consultant here at the KICS Africa 19 Hub at UNESCO ICBA, the International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa. And we are so excited to welcome you back to the 6th session today in the Community of Practice and the Foundations of Educational Quality. So if you've made it this far to the 6th session, that's wonderful. We're so happy to welcome you back. If this is your first session today, then you're more than welcome, and we hope that you consider attending future workshops. We are the GPE KICS Africa 19 Hub. GPE stands for the Global Partnership for Education, and KICS is Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. And we represent 18, no longer 19, 18 countries in Eastern, Western, and Southern Africa. You may have seen from the opening slides that just a couple of quick facts about this community of practice that you are all taking part in. We've had nearly 40 representatives from ministries of education and local education groups from 12 different member states joining, so 12 out of the 18 joining. And 60% of them have been women, which is a first time, a new record for us here in the hub. So that's actually pretty good. We hope to see that number even getting better over time. So we've had about gender parity. We've had 6 workshops, and the dialogue so far have centered on competency-based curriculum and education, 21st century skills, the breadth of learning opportunities, and scaling of innovations in teaching and learning. So today, as you may have seen from the invitations, today's topic will be on project management and scaling of innovations. And we will see 2 case studies today. One case study is teaching at the right level, and the other one is World Reader. And they both have a presence here in Africa in the member states that are hopefully have joined us here today as well. We have representatives from all 3 of these member states that are active, that the projects are active in this community space. And today, the objectives for the session, we're looking at a couple of learning objectives. This is what you will get a chance to do today. You will access regional evidence and best practices from 2 projects on how to engage teachers and policy actors and scale innovations to raise learning outcomes. You will also get to articulate your own experiences or knowledge of scaling up programs in your own contexts. And you will also get to identify the structures, relationships, and processes needed to scale innovations in teaching and learning in your own contexts. This is the agenda for today. I won't go over it very much in depth because we'll experience it in just a few moments. But as you can see, we will have the 2 case studies. For about 20 minutes, they will present their findings, their work, their processes for how they have engaged stakeholders and the government, and how they have scaled up 2 innovations in teaching and learning in Zambia, Nigeria, Ghana, and perhaps even Cote d'Ivoire. It might even be featured in Tarl's presentation as well. We will be hearing from Ashley Morrell, who's the Associate Director of Policy Teaching at the right level, the central team, and JPAL Africa. So then we will have a chance to ask some questions about what we've heard, maybe connected to our own contexts after we hear her presentation. And then we will hear from Ethel Sakiti from World Reader. She's the Regional Director, and we will hear about her work and her team's work in Ghana. Then we will have more questions and answers. After that, we'll have a breakout room activity where you get a chance to talk to each other in the presence of the members from UNESCO, Tarl, and World Reader. And then you'll have a chance to share back for about 3 to 5 minutes each. Each group will get a chance to share what their group discussed. And then we'll look at next steps, and then we'll have a survey at the end. So before we get started with today's agenda, I wanted to ask the members who were present last time at the last workshop to recap what happened, reflect on the proceedings, and to recollect the day. So you could talk about what happened, you could talk about maybe what you learned and took away, you could give some feedback on the facilitation of it. This is an open forum. We have about 5 minutes or less for an open forum. So would anyone like to unmute themselves?
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, my hand is up. I wanted to share about the breadth of learning opportunities. And for me, that stood out. And the key issue there was designing a broad curriculum to develop the whole child, and not just focusing on the written curriculum, but having all aspects of the curriculum including the hidden curriculum and the unwritten curriculum as well. And after the webinar on 29th, on 30th, I was invited to a virtual co-curricular activity of one of the private chartered universities here in Uganda. And in this activity, the final contestants were appearing on a public speaking competition. And for me, this just took me back to what we previously considered in terms of the breadth of learning opportunities that we expose our students to, but also development of the 21st century skills, because one of the key competencies there is public speaking, is communication skills. So I thought that activity just was reinforcing what we had learned previously on those aspects. That was my reflection. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, for sharing that. That's a really excellent connection. And I'm so glad to hear that you were able to see that right away. Sounds like a great 21st century skill. Anybody else want to share a reflection or recollection from last time? Perhaps we can get one more.
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you. Would anyone like to share a reflection or recollection from the workshop last Thursday on 21st century skills and the breadth of learning opportunities?
Marianne, it's Doug McCall. Just to perhaps briefly report on our conversation after the session, and indicating we thought it was a good session, but we realized we didn't have as much time as we needed. Martin Henry from Education International, I will definitely be posting all the evidence supporting what Joyce just referred to in terms of the whole child and breadth of learning. We've been doing some work on that, and I'll make sure that's shared in the community of practice. Give a bit of a research base on the key points. It's really relevant to the conversations going on globally about the future of education, or the futures of education. And hopefully the references, the citations we provide will be useful for people in their own countries and their own discussions within their own countries.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doug. And Doug was one of the facilitators at last week's session, for those of you that may be new here. Doug is, I think it's the International School Health Network, Doug, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for that, Doug. And we look forward to engaging with you as we go forward, because we know that in this space, time is short. Everyone comes in with so much to share, everybody, including all of you, the participants. You are the community of practice. Time is never long enough. So we have to continue these conversations going forward. I think this is just an example of how we've only begun in these 6 workshops, but in no way have we ended or concluded a topic or a discussion. So I will then stop sharing my screen. I'd like to begin with the first activity. So I'm going to pass it over now to Ashley Morell at the TARL team to go over, to begin her presentation. So thank you and stay tuned.
Great, thank you so much, Marianne, and thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Ashley, and I'm from the Teaching at the Right Level Africa Central team. I'm also joined by my colleagues today, Devyani and Jackie. And I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about our experience adapting and scaling up teaching at the right level across several African countries. Specifically, I'm going to focus on a few different things, sharing some reasons why we may not be improving learning outcomes at the same rate as improving enrollments, talking a little bit about the teaching at the right level approach itself, and some of the things that we've learned about scaling up the program. So many of you will be aware of this, but we've made tremendous progress at getting kids into school. We've seen really great improvements in enrollment, but sadly, we haven't seen the same kinds of improvements in learning outcomes. So this is a graph showing the percentage of grade 5 students who are unable to do a simple grade 2 numeracy problem like 7 times 9. And as you can see from this graph, there are a large proportion of children who've made it to grade 5 who are unable to do this. There's quite a lot of variation across countries, but the numbers are large. And this data is pre-COVID, and so we could imagine that, that things are far worse now. And I'm interested to hear from you in the audience who I'm sure are very well informed, what you think the reasons are for why we are battling to improve learning outcomes. And I'd like to ask you to go to menti.com, where it will ask you for a code. And the code that I'd like you to enter is 20554934. Perhaps Devyani or Jackie, if you can pop that into the chat box as well, if people can't see it. And just write in why you think we're battling to improve learning outcomes across several different contexts. And I'll just wait a couple of minutes until we get some results. So you're going to www.menti.com, menti.com, and then you are putting in the code 20554934. And if you put in something and nothing comes up, then please put up your hand, because then I know that it's not working as it should. Thanks, Devyani. So curious to hear from you why you think we are struggling to improve learning outcomes. Great, so thank you for who participated there. A focus on enrollment and completion rate in most countries, but not on actual learning outcomes. So we're focusing on the right things. Not using appropriate teaching and learning methodologies. Great point. Various challenges in terms of resourcing and capacity building. Also, really interesting to see what people's reflections are on this question. Curriculum is ahead of children at every stage. Interesting. That's a really interesting one. Great. So in the content heavy curriculum and assessment not focusing on competencies. Interesting. Teaching quality pack curricula, teacher-centered learning. We need to invest more in quality, not having holistic reforms, unrealistic content of curriculum that cannot be easily implemented. This is really interesting. I'm going to go back to the presentation in the interest of time, but those reflections are fascinating. I think when organizations and researchers were first faced with this sort of conundrum of increasing enrollment, but not the same kinds of improvements in learning outcomes, one of the things that they turned to was actually thinking about inputs. And there were a series of studies which were conducted and evaluated using randomized evaluations on different kinds of inputs. So thinking about flip charts, thinking about textbooks, thinking about extra teachers, thinking about extra computers. And what all of these evaluations found is that inputs on their own, in fact, are not enough to improve learning outcomes. And one of the studies in particular, which was interesting, was done in Kenya, and it was a textbook. Children were given textbooks, and children at the top of the class improved, but the majority of children actually didn't. This didn't help their learning outcomes. And I think that really goes to something that, in fact, you had put as the reasons for why we may not see improvements in learning outcomes, which is that often education systems are serving top performing learners. So they're high stakes primary leaving exams, Teachers are dealing with classes which have multiple different learning levels that are very difficult to manage. There's an emphasis on covering the curriculum, which you mentioned is often very large to get through. And we often see that at home, this is sort of reinforced with top performing students getting a lot of attention. And this means that the majority of children are actually falling through the cracks and not acquiring foundational skills in primary school. This was a challenge that India was also facing in the early 2000s, and education NGO Pratham was trying to address this challenge and came up with what we now know as the teaching at the right level approach. And the teaching at the right level approach at its core has 3 steps: assessment, grouping, and foundational skills. So assessing children one-on-one, grouping them by learning level, and then focusing on foundational skills at a point in the primary education system where you wouldn't ordinarily focus on foundational skills. So generally primary 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the strength of this program is really driven by how it's supported, how implementation teams are built, how assessment informs what's going on in the system, the particular classroom methodology that's used, as well as the monitoring systems. And these supporting components, as well as the sort of overarching approach, have been refined through a process of experimentation and evaluation that's taken place for over 15 years. So this began in the early 2000s, where Pratham and JPAL worked together to sort of test out a proof of concept. Here they were working mostly with volunteers, and they found that yes, when you assess and you group and you focus on foundations, learning outcomes do improve. But what the issue was with these models is that there were issues with take-up. And so what we see is that in the next sort of stage of evaluation is there's a focus on thinking about how do we design a model that can be scaled up? How do we work together with teachers and within the education system so that we can reach all children? And through these evaluations, there were 2 scalable models that were identified, one working with teachers and one working with volunteers who worked through the education systems in bursts. And these lessons are very relevant for several different African contexts. So since 2016, we've been working in a number of different countries to sort of adopt these lessons on teaching at the right level. If we take a step back and sort of think about teaching at the right level at a systems level, it's very different from what you ordinarily see in a system. So, the goal often in an education system is to complete the grade level textbook. But with teaching at the right level, it's to ensure that basic foundations are achieved. And the training and mentoring system, unlike how it's often done, which is a sort of upfront training and then very limited follow-up, with teaching at the right level, there is a lot of follow-up. And the mentoring is done by leaders of practice. These are people who have conducted the approach themselves for a period of up to 15 days, and so understand what it takes to deliver the program well. Grouping is not done by age or grade, but rather done by level. And the teaching activities are interactive. There are individual level activities as well as group level activities. And so it's stepping away for often what is textbook driven or a chalk and talk method. And again, assessment and measurement is quite different in that it's not a pen and paper grade level test, but rather a one-on-one oral assessment. And so what does this look like in different African countries? I wanted to give you a sense of what this looks like in the classroom. And so we've got a short video which is showing the teaching at the right level approach in Zambia, which is known as Catch Up. This is the Ministry of General Education's program supported by So that really gives you a sense of what the approach looks like. And Teaching at the Right Level Africa first started working on thinking about teaching at the right level in different African contexts in 2015, where sort of Pratham and Jaypal started working closely with the Ministry of General Education in Zambia to adapt, and now many years later to scale up the Teaching at the Right Level approach. In 2019, PAL Africa was formed, which is a joint venture between Pratham and Jaypal, and we support partners working to address the learning crisis using the evidence-based Teaching at the Right Level approach. And today in 2021, TAL Africa works directly with governments in Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Zambia, but we also work with a number of other partners across the continent who are either working directly in communities or working with government, and you can see that from the map on the right-hand side. TAL Africa provides a variety of different kinds of support, so we work closely with government to contextualize the approach, provide ongoing support on the different aspects of delivery, providing program management supports, but we also work with the community of organizations who are delivering the TAL approach, and we also have a very ambitious learning agenda where we're trying to make sure that the program is as fantastic as it can be and refining it for different African contexts. So over this journey, what are some of the things that we've learned or that have come through quite strongly? The first is the sort of the need for teaching at the right level. So there certainly is one. These in this graph on the right-hand side are baseline learning levels at the pilot stage. So this is before any teaching at the right level had taken place. So you can see the years differ, some 2016, some 2018, some 2019 at the bottom there. But as you can see, there are large numbers of children who are unable to read a paragraph in a story. And one of the great things about TAL is that the assessment tool that is used as a core component of the program is a simple assessment tool like the one you see on the left-hand side, which is an example of a Hausa assessment tool which is used in Nigeria. And there you can see it's divided into letters, words, sentences, and stories. And that allows you to group the children, but it also allows you to have this simple data which really highlights the sort of the challenge and the need for programs which are focusing on foundational skills to allow children to catch up. And there's also a lot of work that goes into program design and adaptation. So while there are many really important lessons that we draw on from the work that was conducted in India, every program needs to be designed for its particular context. And so we look carefully at things like language. What is the right language for that context? Is it the language that's spoken at home? Is it the language that's within the education system for that year? That's something that needs to be carefully considered, and materials need to be designed for that particular language. We need to consider things like the existing educational approaches and programs that are in action, and how the Teaching at the Right Level approach sits alongside those or within those. We need to look at existing materials and resources within schools. So if you're trying to develop sort of a sustainable approach and program, what resources exist within the school which can be used for the approach? What additional resources are required? That's something that we need to carefully consider. And then again, monitoring and mentoring systems is something that we've had to think about a lot and work on carefully and co-create in these different systems. And as much as possible, have these monitoring and mentoring systems work within existing government systems, and that's been an important part of the journey too. And just to say another thing on monitoring and mentoring, I think this is one of the particular areas where we've had to do a lot of learning together with our government partners, as the situations are quite different across the different countries, but also from India. So what we found is that the schools often in India were much closer together, or there were good public transport systems. And what we find in many of the contexts in which we're supporting is that schools are far away from one another, and there's very limited public transport. And so we need to think about creating different kinds of monitoring and mentoring systems that work within that context. So there's a lot of adaptation that takes place for each context. To give you a sense of what this looks like concretely, I wanted to talk a little bit about the catch-up program in Zambia. So this is the Ministry of General Education's program. It's supported by VVOB with technical assistance from TAL Africa and many other partners. And the program focuses on children in grades 3 to grades 5. The language it's a literacy and numeracy program, but the language for the literacy component is the local language. And there are many of these now. There are now TAL materials in all the languages. The program runs in government schools, and it runs for 2 terms every academic year, generally from January to July. It's an hour of instruction a day, and kind of going between language and math. This is taking place during the school day, but outside of the timetable. They are mentors at lots of different levels. So district coordinators play a mentorship role, zonal coordinators play a mentorship role, as well as school level mentors. And the program is taught or facilitated by school teachers. And the role of the government is the owner of the program. They're providing strategic orientation and defining policy implementation, running all the coordination trainings, etc. To give you a sense of the sort of history of this program, the Ministry of General Education created a working group for catch-up in 2015. And in 2016, we had members from the ministry go to India to see the approach in action there and see Pratham's work. The pilot actually had 2 different versions of the Teaching at the Right Level approach. So one was the hour-a-day program, and the other was a sort of holiday program where it was an intensive period of teaching at the right level for about 4 weeks. This was done in 80 schools, 40 schools in each model, with supports from VVOB, who continues to provide support. And the government chose to work with the hour-a-day model, as this was the model that was going to be more sustainable and scalable. In 2017, there was secured funding for the growth of this program, and as you can see from the timeline, the program has continued to grow, and in this year is in more than 2,000 schools. The approach works within the government structure. So this is showing all the various different departments and government officials that are engaged in the catch-up program. So if we start from the Ministry of General Education column, this is thinking about which departments are involved at a national level. So there you can see teacher education, standards of curriculum, planning and information. And this sort of flags the fact that it's much more than just teacher training. Because of the important role of assessment and monitoring and mentoring, it's really critical that the standard of curriculum department are involved, as well as planning and information. So important that all those different directorates are engaged. We have a number of different people who are engaging again at a provincial level, again cutting across those different departments. Similarly at district education level, and then at zonal level and primary school level, there again are people engaged. This is also showing the mentor structure. So there's mentors at a school level, at a zonal level, and also at a district level. VVOB supports the program with a national team that sits in Lusaka, but then also at a district level with district coordinators who are supporting implementation. So it really sits within those government structures. I think one of the most compelling things about the catch-up program is that learning outcome improvements have improved over time. So in this graph, you can see the orange is the children who have can read a simple paragraph, the percentage point improvement of that proportion of children. And the gray is looking at numeracy. So it's looking at the children who can solve a subtraction problem, the percentage point improvement. And as you can see, those bars are increasing over time. So the percentage point improvement is getting better year on year. But at the same time, the program is in more and more schools. And so that's been really a fantastic thing to see in terms of the program improving as the program scales up. So this is my final slide, and it's just on what we've learned and what we still recognizing that there's still a lot to learn. But I think what we've seen is that children who've been in school for a few years can learn very, very quickly using this approach. And those at the lowest levels tend to learn the most. Teaching at the right level is flexible enough to be adapted for a variety of different contexts, which I've outlined before. And when working in schooling systems, we know from the research that it's important to dedicate time to teaching at the right level, preferably during the school day, so that teachers don't return to their business as usual. We know that material and teaching training is not enough. There needs to be strong mentoring and monitoring support, and mentors doing their own practice classes and being leaders of practice is a really critical part of the approach too. You need to ensure that there's adequate technical support, definitions of roles and responsibilities within the system to ensure that delivery is successful. And that successful scalable programs can be designed and owned by government and integrated into education systems. I think we've seen this.
Oh yeah, it's me here. Yeah, I'm on. I'm on.
And we recognize that there's still a huge amount to learn. So thank you very much, and I think we will now open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Any questions from the team, from participants? So there's one from Bet in Uganda. The 1 hour program, the 1 hour a day program, didn't this overload the pupils as well as teachers? Did the schools have to recognize the programs to accommodate it? To reorganize the programs to accommodate it.
Great, thank you so much. So I'll give you a few different examples from different contexts. So, for example, in Nigeria, the program actually runs for generally 1.5 hours to 2 hours a day, depending on the states. And the first 2 hours of the school day are dedicated to foundational skills. So they're dedicated to reading and to basic maths. And I think what we've heard is that with these learning level groups, I think teachers find that it's, in fact, easier to teach because you're teaching a group of children who have the same needs, but you're certainly taking a step away from the curriculum. In other places, like in Zambia, it's kind of taking place outside of the timetable. So it doesn't necessarily have an influence in that way. So I think certainly in these cases, governments have chosen to sort of prioritize those foundational skills and make time for it during the day. And I think that there can be quite a strong case made for that, given the gaps that we're seeing in foundational skills, which you can see in the data. Thanks very much for that question. I hope that I addressed it fully.
Thank you, Ashley. There's also a question from Joyce, and she's asking, are parents involved in any way in this program?
So I think it's not a piece that I spoke about in these various different things. I think we've realized the role of parents even more during COVID, especially when schools have been closed and there's been a lot more reliance, I would say, at least in my experience, on the home and what the home can provide. And so there are, in some instances, although this does not cut across all programs, some instances where parents are being engaged by, there being worksheets that go home, that they're encouraged to do with their children, sharing the assessment results with community members so that the community understands the need for foundational skills and the learning levels that the children are at. And various other home-based supports is now being introduced to kind of make up for the loss in school time that we've experienced over the last 1.5 years. But I would say that the core actors of the teaching at the right level approach really are sort of the teachers and the kids in the school, and that is the heart of the program. Thank you very much, Joyce. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. Is there anyone with a question? Please just raise your hand. We can give you an opportunity just to ask directly without typing in the chat. I'm not seeing any raised hand. Okay. So I think this is just a comment from Tivani. For community-based programs led by instructors, it is easier to engage parents in India with school systems as well. There has been considerable success in engaging parents. Thank you, Devani. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Maybe this is just a question for myself also to Ashley. We've realized that it's very difficult for teachers to move away from their usual way of doing things, business as usual, to incorporate other programs. So how do you go about this? Do you have mentors who mentor these teachers as they implement the TAL program, or what happens for you to ensure that the program picks? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important point, and it's actually a point that came through from the research when only material and training were provided. Often teachers did not actually adopt the teaching at the right level approach in the classroom. So I think there are a few things that have been seen as really important in terms of shifting teacher behavior. I think the first is having a dedicated time. So as opposed to the onus being on teachers to figure out how to incorporate the new methodology, there is a specific time where teaching at the right level takes place, which I think is helpful. There are mentors. So there are school-based mentors that are supporting teachers, but also there will be mentors that are sort of cluster or zonal level. So these are mentors that are moving around to different schools to provide support, as well as sort of district level mentors. And what we've seen as really valuable for the mentoring cadre is that they themselves practice the approach. So the mentors go through a training process, but then they also conduct the methodology for 15 days where they assess children at the beginning and they assess children at the end. And during that time, they are equipped with the skills that they need. They also see children's learning improve, which is incredibly motivational. And then they are really well equipped to provide this mentoring support to teachers. So I think that's also been a really important part of the sort of lessons that we've learned. I'd say that the final thing that I would add is I think because of the way the program's structured and that teachers assess children one-on-one and then children are regrouped by that learning level. So it already feels quite different because children are being grouped, not according to age or grade, but according to learning level. And then that at the end of your 2-term program or however long your program is, you're going to be assessing kids again. And generally what you see through that process is you see that you actually experience children's learning outcome improving because you've done the test with them in January and they've only been able to identify a letter. And then that same child you're engaging with one-on-one and they're now able to identify a paragraph. And I think that's also, and this is anecdotal, but I think that's also quite powerful in terms of shifting teachers' behavior and teachers wanting to take on the approach. Oh, Yvonne, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, I think we have additional questions in the chat room, but we'll combine them with the next session. So for now, because of time, I would like to call upon Ethel from Wild Reader just to take us through our session, and then we'll also go back and you'll get an opportunity to answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you, Ashley, for that wonderful presentation. And so moving from teaching at the right level, we want to look at adapting and scaling teacher professional development using technology. We're going to have some conversations around teachers' experiences and the different teacher continuous professional development structures that we have in Ghana. We are being funded by the GPA KICS as well as IDRC. We are a consortium which is led by the Foundation for Information Technology, Education and Development, FITED. The 3 organizations, in addition to FITED in that consortium, we have UNESCO, World Reader, as well as SUMA. UNESCO's work is based in Uzbekistan, World Reader is in Ghana, and SUMA is also with Honduras. So that's the group, and I'll be talking a little bit more about what we're doing. Next slide, please. So before we get into the nitty-gritties, let me just talk a little bit about World Reader, who we are. So we are a global NGO. We actually have programs based in East Africa, in Latin America. We have some programs in the Middle East. And here in West Africa also, we're working with a number of partners supporting underserved communities with digital reading solutions. and also focusing mainly on learning outcomes. As you can see from the previous presentations, we are all interested in working together with the key stakeholders and actors at the ministry level to see how we can enhance learning outcomes. But we are also interested in workforce readiness. We talked about 21st century skills at the beginning during our recap session. And for us also, we are looking at gender equity. World Reader actually combines, if you could go back, please. We combine books, e-books using technology. We combine reading programs. We provide data to support readers. We have been doing some work in Ghana since 2010. We actually scaled one of our interventions in one of the districts called the Kwabibiri Municipal Education Office. I have some of my colleagues here from Ghana, so they are very conversant, where we provided all the primary schools with digital resources. We loaded these digital devices with textbooks, storybooks, and all the materials that teachers needed. And we also provided a lot of capacity building for teachers as to how to integrate digital reading and digital resources into classroom teaching. And then we also involved a lot of parents also in the program. As we were implementing this program, one of the things that we learned as we did our operational researches was the fact that teachers were, the role of teachers was central. And if we could pay attention to teachers' continuous professional development, that would go a long way in sustaining the interventions that we have been undertaking here in Ghana. And so we joined the Teacher Professional Development at Scale Coalition. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Next slide. So this is the coalition is a collaborative effort of education and technology stakeholders. A global group that is helping to design and deliver large-scale teacher professional development using technology. Definitely, they're supporting the attainment of SDG 4. And I'm going to also invite you, I think ministries, universities, and all educational stakeholders are invited to join this coalition. And I think I might have some of my colleagues also who are from the Foundation of Information Technology, Education and Development here with us. And we can share some of their contacts. Those members who are interested in joining this coalition, they can also join to, to also develop an at-scale model. Next slide, please. So for today, we would be exploring the principles of teacher professional development at scale approach. We'll be discussing how to achieve equity, quality, and efficiency in ICT-mediated teacher professional development. We would also be looking at the various steps that we have taken in terms of trying to scale a teacher professional development at scale model in Ghana through this GPE Expanded project. So in terms of introducing, like I indicated, it's a 3-country research. It's happening in parallel here in Ghana, in Honduras, and Uzbekistan. It's a research, it's an implementation research that is seeking to understand to what extent teacher continuous professional development at scale can be used for in-service teachers' professional learning, especially in GPE member countries, and to see how we could use the learnings to improve teachers' access to quality professional development. We are actually adapting, we are implementing, we are evaluating and continuously improving the TPD approach that we're trying to develop here. And we are also researching into finding out what are those factors, enabling factors or impeding factors that affect a TPD approach. This could be curriculum, pedagogy, even a sociocultural context or the politics could have an impact. And so we're researching into all that. And we are developing this framework so we can strengthen capacity and we can continue to promote evidence-informed TPD. So, next slide, please. So what is a TPD at scale model? I've used that term a number of times, but basically it's referring to systems and programs that are designed at scale, and it harnesses or leverages the power of technology, and also strategically looks at contextual sensitive issues that would enable the system to actually meet teachers' professional learning needs. It has three core elements that it takes into consideration. That is equity, making sure that the system or the program is accessible and inclusive of all teachers. It also adheres to issues of quality, making sure that it's adhering to the principles of effective TPD. It also takes into consideration the efficiency. In our context within Africa, we don't have the laxity of resources. And so whichever programs that are designed needs to take into consideration cost effectiveness. And so these are three core elements that we should see in a TPD system or program that is designed at scale. Next slide. So what are some of the core components of a TPD at scale approach? So it has elements of classroom activities. There are prompts for reflections. There are assessments. Teachers, through these activities, are able to try out new things in the classroom. It also allows for time for teachers to collaborate with peers, kind of in a community of practice. And then it also has experts support or coaching or some form of mentoring that teachers also receive. And then it also offers technology so that the content that is provided to teachers and the support can be offered through multiple ICT formats. And as the approach is being implemented, there's continuous improvement, there's evaluation, just so that we can have continuous refinement of the process. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about two very important models, proven models that have worked in other contexts that we are using as a reference, but also researching into our own context to understand what the needs are, and then we can then adapt. So we have the teacher education through school-based support in India. This was implemented in 2005, developed by the Open University UK, and Professor Frida Wolfenden is here with us. She was part of that team that developed this. And really what they did with the Test India, as we call it, is that they organized the TPD, or what we are referring to as Teacher Continuous Professional Development, at the school level and also at the district level. They actually used an online, massive open online course. They used EDX, so the courses were loaded and on the as a MOOC, and then teachers would then independently undertake the MOOC using laptops. But there were also a group that did not have computer access. So those groups were also meeting in face-to-face classes with their facilitators. And the groups that were meeting in face-to-face classes, they also had informal professional learning communities. They use social media platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, Google groups to interact. And apart from the fact that they also had facilitators who were actually supporting their works, those who were also taking the MOOCs, independently via the laptops, were also receiving online and peer facilitator interaction. Apart from that, the face-to-face group also had their facilitators, setting up WhatsApp groups or discussions. And so they could offer that kind of coaching and mentoring support to the teacher learners. Yeah. So this is about the Test India model. Can we look at the next model, please? So the next one is the Early Language Literacy and Numeracy Digital, which was implemented by the Foundation for Information Technology Education and Development, FITEC. And that happened between 2016 and 2017. It actually also looked at having the TPD organized at the school level. Here they use a completely offline approach. So they put they loaded the courses on CDs or thumb drives, and then teachers, with access to computers can then go in independently, have their studies. Then they also had opportunity to apply the concepts that they had learned in the classroom. And then, every 2 weeks they met in what they call the Learning Action Cell, which is like a professional learning community or a community of practice, and where they engaged with each other, they learned collaboratively, there were activities that they were engaged in, and they were able to now reflect and also to build knowledge based on their experiences in the classroom and then what they had also learned during their independent study. Here also they had coaches who were providing support to them through personal face-to-face visits. They used voice calls or text messages as well. And at the same time, the coaches were also refreshed. They had webinars organized for them. And then they also had video tutorials. So the coaches were also refreshed. Now, the entire process was supported by school heads. You would see that from the two examples that we mentioned, there are some key elements that we see. They are all working through existing structures and relationships, but they are not using a cascade model, which is very prevalent in our sub-region. They were focusing on the school, so it's school-based, and it was mainly focused on the teacher's own professional needs. They were using some form of technology and also some digital resources, but technology was just a tool to facilitate learning. And then they also had blended forms of peer support. So they met face-to-face, or they used social media platform also to engage. And then they all had some kind of expert coaching and mentoring to support their works. And so you could see that in both cases, there was access, there's some kind of participation, and then also it allows teachers also to extend their views into the classroom. And so it helped them to be innovative. Some of the success stories with this model, the eLearn model, for example, after the pilot, the evaluation that was conducted showed that teachers had high satisfaction. They really enjoyed the content and lessons. And then it had also improved their pedagogical knowledge as well. Currently, as we speak, the pilot is being scaled. It has been adopted by the Department of Education, and it's been institutionalized and scaled up nationally to over 300,000 teachers. And so these are the two models that we are trying to learn from and to see what will work in our context. Next slide, please. So here in Ghana, we have also started the process. We wouldn't take wholesale what we have seen and start to implement. And so we're going through research. And we are doing that in co-implementing with the Ministry of Education, specifically the National Teaching Council. And the council actually is in charge of raising teacher standards, and all the policies that have to do with teachers' continuous professional development is housed with the National Teaching Council. We also have a research institution, which is the School of Educational Leadership at the University of Ghana, which is the research lead here in Ghana. And so these are the partners. Apart from that, we have a number of agencies, entities that we are working with in scaling this program. Next slide, please. So there are three big phases of research that we have to go through. There is a contextualization, a customization, and a field testing phase. Those are three kinds of big pieces of research that we'll go through. I'll take my time to explain each of the phases. So let's go to the next slide, please. So before we get into those three big phases of research, let me just share what we have in terms of our ecosystem. In Ghana, we have the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education has three big agencies. We have the Ghana Education Service, which is one of the biggest arms because they actually manage the schools. We have regional offices, we have district education offices. The districts manage, the circuits and the schools and school heads. And so it's a really big agency of the ministry, and that's the implementing arm of the ministry. Then we have the National Schools Inspectorate Authority, making sure that the monitoring and checking and tracking progress in schools. We have the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, and then we have the National Teaching Council. With the National Teaching Council, they work very closely with continuous professional development service providers, kind of NGOs and other civil society partners like World Reader. But the ministry also receives a lot of support from development partners. We have our teacher unions that have a very strong voice here in Ghana, and so they have to be involved in whatever happens within the educational ecosystem. We have our universities, and like I said, we also have a CSOs. We have the Ghana National Education Campaign Coalition, which is one of the biggest that we have, CSOs, when it comes to issues of education. And then the private sector also gives a lot of support to the ministry. Next slide. So what is the situation with TPD in Ghana? We have a few policies and programs that I would like to touch on briefly. The mother of all those is the pre-tertiary teacher professional development and management policy. This was a policy that was developed in 2010. We revised it in 2014. Mainly it was to provide kind of like a regulatory framework to manage teacher professional development and to help teachers to become proficient practitioners. It also provided kind of guidance in terms of teachers' career growth and issues of promotions and all that. We also have a mentoring and coaching framework. It provides some kind of like a guide or a standard against which all forms of mentoring and coaching activities can be assessed. We have governments also, putting in a lot into CPD. In fact, every teacher in Ghana has an annual, how do you call it? An annual allocation of $200. Which is to support their own professional development. We also have developed some guidelines for point-based system. This is a kind of a policy that helps to assess teachers based on defined competencies and also provide some kind of evidence for teachers' professional proficiency. And it outlines how teachers can take their professional development. So it has 3 categories of professional development. They are mandatory courses, they are rank-based courses, and then they are recommended activities. So teachers at any rank would have to take some courses at their rank, some mandatory courses, and then they will also need to take some recommended activities as part of their professional development. It also outlines the fact that teachers should, participate in professional learning communities. It could be at the school level or department level or at the cluster level. And also teachers could also join communities of practice based on subjects. It could be subject-based group or also based on grades. There could be specific grades also. So this is something that is very important to us currently. And since our educational reform also, we've dedicated some time for professional learning. In fact, during the implementation of our curriculum, we began with having some dedicated time in the course of the week and the month for teachers' continuous professional development. In fact, on those CPD days, children do not even come to school. And then we also, for the first time ever, we agreed on a national teacher standards. And this is the first ever standard that has been developed to actually look at guiding teachers for their preparation and practice. It actually helps it outlines some of the things that we expect of teachers in terms of what they're expected to know, what they are able to do, what types of qualities are we expecting from teachers, what behaviors do we expect them, to showcase. And so the standards has professional, professional knowledge, we have professional practice, professional attitudes that teachers are measured by. And since we changed our pre-service curriculum, when teachers leave the colleges of education, they are assessed by these teacher standards. So they go through an exam that they're measured by these standards. And then if they go through successfully, then they are licensed and registered. So these are very interesting things that are happening in terms of TPD in Ghana. The next slide, please. So yeah, just like in any of our context here in Africa, we also have existing training or professional development has been cascade. So from the national level, we have master trainers who train regional trainers and then goes through the district. And so by the time it gets to the school, you all agree with me, some of the issues we discussed in our past community of practice in terms of TCPD, elements of quality are lost and all those challenges. So it's the same thing that we have currently in Ghana. So what are we trying to change? Next slide. So basically, we are looking at, like I said, we don't want to just take those proven models from Philippines and India into our context. We're going through a whole research phase where we are assessing the existing in-service teacher education in Ghana and also prioritizing some of the contextual issues that I just spoke about. And we are also undertaking research also to find out whether are we really ready for an ICT mediated TPD. In fact, because of COVID, we have been forced to accept that. But even though COVID is in, we still conducted a research just to find out how ready we are. And so we undertook a desk review, we undertook some key informant interviews and a survey. And I'm going to share some of the findings of those surveys with you quickly. Next slide, please. So we looked at a few areas during the research. What are the TPD structures in the country? Do teachers have access to technological resources? What are the issues with equity and access to technology? Are teachers ready to use their own locally owned devices for TPD? And then what's the situation with working with professional learning communities at the local level? So what did we find out? Next slide. Yes, so in terms of methodology, this is what we did. We undertook the research in 3 regions, 6 districts. We had interviews with education officers in these districts. And then we also surveyed 150 teachers, making sure we had the gender balance in terms of disaggregation. We also took into consideration elements of teachers with learning disabilities. We also, these are some of the findings. We had identified some of the existing structures in terms of those that are providing teacher professional development, mainly Ghana Education Service and then the National Teaching Council and then the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment. They were the ones that are actually providing a lot of support when it comes to teacher professional development. I talked about the teacher professional development framework, and we talked also about some of the policies around the credit points. We wanted to find out were teachers ready. In fact, we found out about 76% of our teachers had access to smartphones, and they were these were data-enabled phones, and they were using it for informal, learning, but they also are a potential for using them for a mobile-assisted TPD at scale model. A number of teachers already were using, social media platforms, and the fact was also that we already have a system based on the policies. We had a PLC framework in place to offer peer support and spaces for teachers' collaboration and learning, as well as knowledge sharing. Next slide. These were kind of like the opportunities that we found. In terms of the findings, what were the challenges? Just like in any of our contexts, issues of access to internet, transportation costs to, access TPD courses or workshops. We also realized that a number of the teachers surveyed were open, to blended models, both offline and online. But we realized a number of them that we were not going to have access to online platform. We'll need to have pre-record the content in such a manner that they could access them, especially teachers in rural settings. We also identified a few issues with gender equity and social inclusion. And we will be incorporating a bit more also into the field testing phase that I'll be talking about briefly. Next slide. So in terms of gender, we didn't find any differences in terms of access to mobile phones. Both male and female teachers had access to smartphones. Majority of them also had cited the challenges, and there were no actual differences in terms of gender, in terms of the challenges that teachers face when it comes to lack of equipment or the transportation challenges or internet connectivity. One interesting thing also that we found was that the older teachers were not really interested in, having an ICT mediated platform per se. They were looking out for, basically you understand that for older teachers, they're looking out for methods that would not demand so much of use of computers. But basically that also offers us opportunity to look at a model that is very inclusive, so that if we have younger teachers that are, digitally literate and can support some of these teachers in professional learning groups, this would be a very good opportunity. So these were some of the findings from the survey. Next slide, please. So the second part of the research I talked about, so this we've just finished with the contextualization, which is assessing the context and understanding whether we are ready at all. The second part of the research is actually looking at adapting with reference to those two models and also taking into consideration the principles of a TPD, trying to develop a delivery model for teacher continuous professional development at scale. Whatever we develop, we are going to test it on the field, understand what works, what doesn't work, and then it has to go through several processes of refinement. We are also developing a number of courses, and in Ghana, we have identified a specific problem of practice, which is reading. You would agree with me that with most of our early grade reading assessments, we haven't performed very well across the the continent, and it's the same in Ghana. And so we want to look at reading, and because of we're looking at technology, and also the fact that World Reader is also looking at digital reading, we also want to introduce teachers to digital reading resources and other open educational resources that are available out there. And so we'll be adapting a course for a scale delivery. And it involves a lot of consultations with key stakeholders. And so with all the stakeholders that I had mentioned in the ecosystem, they are involved continuously reviewing the process and helping us to come up with a model that we can test for Ghana. The next slide, please.
Ethel, just a quick reminder, sorry, you have your time is almost up. So if you could please wrap it up.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you.
Marian. Yeah, so the model is based on the national teacher standards that I talked about. And so we, like I said, we're using the existing structures. We are aligning it to the policy, the curriculum. We want to make sure that the ICT platforms encourage teacher participation. And basically, we are also creating spaces for teachers learning and collaboration. Next slide, please. And so these are some of the course materials. We want to develop materials that are activity-based. Remember the TPD principles talks about a number of activities that will allow teachers to reflect and engage learners. So we are looking at some of these materials. And we'll also be introducing teachers to some of these digital resources. World Reader has a children's digital reading app called the Booksmart app. Apart from that, we have other ones on the continent, African Storybook and others. We want to expose teachers to this through the course that we'll be developing. Next slide. So this is the model that we are proposing. We want to look at, through the consultation with stakeholders, we want to look at something that is happening at the school level. We would use both offline and online approaches using teachers' mobile phones. We would have independent study by the teachers. We would have classroom application, quite similar to the Philippines model. What we are also looking at is that most of the teachers have talked about WhatsApp. That so for the teachers that would be online, they could use a WhatsApp, but we also can blend it with face-to-face chats as well. And then for teachers that would not have connectivity, their content will be put on SD cards on their mobile phones so they could access them. And then teachers will meet every 2 weeks in a professional learning community. And then also they would have support of the master trainers and district teacher support teams. And these district teacher support teams will also be receiving refreshers on a monthly basis. School teacher heads or school head teachers will be supporting the process, as well as what we call the school improvement support officers as well. The next one. So we are actually at the third phase, and actually based on this model, we want to test it first with a small group of teachers, 30 teachers. And then afterwards, we would, based on the refinements, we will do for a larger scale of teachers, and that will be the scaling process. And we're going to use an improvement science methodology where we plan, we study, act, and also respecting all those elements of equity, quality, and efficiency. Yeah. So thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure to share what we're doing in Ghana, the scaling process, and happy to receive any questions that colleagues may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ethel. That was so rich. I'm sure participants will have a lot of questions, especially since we saw a lot of discussions during our session on teacher performance development. So they are now the question and answer sessions. Please just raise your hand and give you an opportunity to ask. And before that, there's a question that came in for Tal. This is from Tesfai. And the question is there additional fee for the extra classes to motivate teachers? And how did you manage the equity issue, especially for those from disadvantaged communities? So Ashley or any member from TAL, that question goes to you.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. I think that Devyani may have addressed the first question in terms of additional teacher incentives. There aren't any, often because this is sort of part of the core school day and part of the core responsibilities, and also for the sort of sustainability of the program. So I think that's the first piece. On the second piece, which is around, did you say disadvantaged children and equity concerns?
Yes.
So I think the approach is good for all children in that it accelerates their learning. But what we found is that the approach is most useful for children at the lower learning levels. And I think that you could imagine that the lower learning levels are often correlated with other, with not having a lot of support elsewhere, or with other factors. And so, in fact, this approach in terms of making time to catch up on foundational skills in sort of middle to upper primary should be benefiting the kids that are struggling.
Thank you, Ashley. I hope that answer satisfied. We also have a question from Caroline. She said this is to World Reader Ethel and team. This is quite admirable, strides in TPD. How do you sustain teacher interest in TPD? Are teachers required to participate in TPD? I think those are two questions. One, how do you sustain their interest? And two, are they required to participate? Thank you.
Yeah, so we had those consultations. That's a very good question. Thank you so much. So we had some of those conversations with the teachers, and one of the things that teachers have talked about in terms of their own motivation has to be the fact that promotion is based on receiving credit points for taking PD, professional development. And so if the courses or the programs are linked to some of these credit points, that will help them to receive the certification for courses that they complete, then that is a huge motivation for them as well. So we are currently, in touch with the National Teaching Council, trying to have a learning management system that we can link to the ministry's own portal, so that as they complete the courses and receive their assessment, the summative assessment, they receive their point, they receive certification, and I think that that would go a long way to motivate them to undertake some of these courses and complete them as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ethel. There's also a question from Betty, and Betty says, thanks for sharing. Are professional learning communities school-based, or do they cut across different schools?
Yeah, thank you, Betty. Yeah, they are mainly school-based, but where schools are closely knit in a circuit, in Ghana, you might have 3 or 4 schools in the same area. They can also meet as a cluster and have their professional learning community sessions. Yeah. They could also decide to have, literacy, grade 1 teachers or grade 2 teachers. And so what they have teachers have suggested is that they want this to be district owned. And so that's what we will be doing, for the teachers to make sure that they're engaging and learning together as well. Thank you. I have other colleagues in the room, so feel free, any of my colleagues, feel free to jump in for any of the responses as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Jonathan. Jonathan just says that thank you for the presentation, and he is inspired to begin the same in Uganda. I think you had shared that if someone wants to be a participant, you will share your details. So I believe that will be done. Then there's a question: who awards the credits to the teachers, and how are the teachers' progress tracked? So who awards the certificates or the credits, sorry, and how are the teachers' progress tracked? That is from Lola Kanini of Zambia.
Thank you, Lola. Yes, so the National Teaching Council would be the entity that would be tracking this. and they would be awarding, certificates. They would be reviewing the content, the materials. We would also have assessments, which would be part of it, but mainly activity-based. And they would be doing these assessments and then awarding the credits as well as the certificates. Yeah. Yvonne, I think you are muted.
Sorry, thank you. This is from Jacqueline Onyango, also one of our facilitators in earlier sessions, and she's saying great progress in TPD. Does the TPD allow teacher to progress upwards from one school level to another, or are they limited to promotion within the same school level? You're muted yourself, Ethel.
Oh,
please unmute.
Prof. Frida Wolfenden is here with us. If you don't mind, I would like her to jump in with a few thoughts on a few of these questions as well. Frida, would you like to jump in?
Sure, Ethel, thanks very much. And good afternoon, colleagues. I think actually our colleague, Professor Jonathan Fletcher, is best placed to answer this question, because this is about the intricacies of the system within Ghana and the way in which teachers in Ghana are given sort of different designations. And according to their designation, then they have to complete a certain number of credit points around TPD within each year in order to be relicensed. But I think, Jonathan, if you're still with us, I think you can probably answer in more detail.
I think he is here. Prof has joined another meeting, and so
sorry,
not around, so I'll take that. Yeah. So basically, I think that with the system, we are actually, we don't want to change what we already have in terms of the structures and the existing relationships. And so we are actually fitting all that we are developing into the existing policies, the existing practices. And so as much as possible, we wouldn't have a major change to what the system has already outlined. And so that's why we are also consulting. We continue to consult stakeholders. If there are new requests that are coming on board, these would be assessed together as actors within the education system. And if we agree on making shifts, slight shifts, of course, we will do that. But as much as possible, we want to make sure that we are focusing on the existing, protocols and practices and policies that, the government has put in place. Yeah. There's one also good news that has just come in. We are also hearing from the ministry that the ministry is going to provide each teacher with a laptop. So that's very good news. And we are hoping that that also adds up to what we're studying and what is possible within the TPD model that we're trying to develop and test. Yeah.
Okay.
Yvonne. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ethel.
So Yvonne, I'm seeing some questions also around data. Yes, so this came up for most of the consultations also with the teachers. And one of the things that they've said, at least we went during the research, we found out that on a monthly basis, average teachers will spend 30 cedis, which is roughly like $6 a month on data. And they use this for their own informal WhatsApp groups anyway. And they don't mind actually using this for their own learning. But like I also said, government is going to provide some small supports for them. Like I said, $200 per year. And we believe we'll test and see. If it's a big issue, it will be reflected in the first level of the field test. And if it's a big issue, then possibly we can then engage with the NCC to find out how we can address those needs of teachers, so that as much as possible, we have to make sure everybody is involved, there's equity, there's the quality is in place, and then it's also cost effective for the teachers. So we are not draining their pockets through going through a TPD. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethel. There's also a question from Nura. And she's asking, how do you account for the use of smartphone in terms of data provision for teachers? I'll also just add another one from Tesfaye. How did you motivate the use of technology for teachers who are quite old and not willing to use technology, or was there any resistance from teachers in the use of technology? So those are two questions. One, how do you account for the use of smartphones in terms of data provision for teachers? And also, how do you motivate teachers to use technology, especially those who are old or not willing to use?
Yeah, so in fact, I think even though we have blamed COVID for almost everything, one of the benefits of COVID is that it has pushed everybody to accept that it's time to shift. And in terms of everybody, we all have to learn and relearn. And so technology has become very important, especially during the school closures. For over 10 months, you know, teachers, children, all of us, we are at home, and we were forced to learn. And so most of these older teachers, even though at the beginning we're not really interested, COVID has forced everybody to see that the technology is going to be a useful tool for us moving forward in the midst of COVID. And so that has served as a motivation in itself for older teachers. But of course, we need to support them. I was in a conference this morning, and one of the presenters talked about we need to now begin talking about pedagogy of care and compassion. We are all learning, so we have to provide accommodation, supports each other. If we have younger teachers that are smart and digitally literate and can support these older ones, then we can have some of those communities with some of these older teachers so that they can be supported and helped, you know, within the community to access the materials and then also to be able to participate in the PLC activities as well. So that's in terms of the motivation. In terms of the smartphones and data, I think I had talked about it already. A number of teachers have the smartphones. Those that do not have the smartphones, majority of them have the feature phones, and we are trying to also have the content that would be developed on SD cards so they can access them offline and also be able to receive the content. Apart from that, the NTC is also working to provide a kind of like a mimicking an offline LMS platform so that their data can also be loaded, and then they can also equally be accessed and certificated just like the other colleagues who are online. Yeah, I hope I have answered that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethel. I think we have two more questions, and then we'll jump over to the next session. So the first one is from oh boy, they keep coming. So from Caroline, how do you manage teacher data in terms of gathering credits? Do you have personnel to manage teachers at local, regional, and national level? That's one. The second one is from Doug, and he's asking, are the education faculties and teacher unions involved in the program? And the last one is from Lola Karniki. How do you determine the causes of TPD and avoid teachers concentrating on only obtaining a higher qualification? The program's need-based.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are really great questions. So I'm going to start off with Caroline's. We have special personnel to manage the TPD. Yes, so like I said, the TPD will be happening at the school level. And so we're trying to provide, you know, an alternative to the current cascade model. So everything will be happening at the school level. Teachers will be assessing their own professional needs at the school level and be, you know, taking their professional learning at that level. And whether they are education teacher unions, yes. So the program has a technical working group, and our teacher unions are involved. We have a number of stakeholder consultations. Like I said, we're using an improvement science methodology, so we are continuously engaging and consulting, and we are directly involved, you know, in the program. Yeah. So with Lola's question about the courses for TPD, courses for obtaining, yeah. All right, so I think that would be directly in the ambit of the National Teaching Council, and they would actually be driving this process so that, and like I said, with the policy around, how do you call it, the guidelines for the point-based system, they have made some courses even compulsory, mandatory. So teachers at any rank, you have mandatory courses, you have recommended activities that you need to undertake in order to receive your promotion. So NTC has a firm grip on that, so that teachers are just not focusing on their comfort zones or only what would help them to achieve higher qualifications, but what would actually help them to support the learners, in the classrooms. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ethel, for sharing. I'm sure all of us are learning a lot. So in case there's a question that has not been answered, you or your team, please feel free just to answer in the chat box. So for now, we are going to the next session, and I will call upon Marianne to take us through the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for that. And also thank you so much to the teams from both TARL and from World Reader. I agree with a point from Sam in the chat box that we have so much to learn from each other. So I will, without a whole lot of discussion, I'll just briefly share what the activity now is. We're going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. We don't have a whole lot of time, but we have enough time to exchange our viewpoints about these two questions. So the two questions are, from a government perspective and experience, what are the critical components necessary for a successful scale-up process? And what should your government look for in terms of programs that they could choose to scale up and invest in? So these are really application questions for you to consider in your own context, what could work. We're about to share with you 4 Google Docs, one for each group. The time has been reduced to 10 minutes for discussion and then 3 minutes for sharing, or sorry, 2 minutes for sharing in the plenary when we come back. So you can type notes directly on this document to the 2 questions. And we ask that you pick a group leader, someone who can start the discussion, and then someone who can share briefly the highlights, not every detail, but the key highlights, maybe the cross-cutting issues or ideas when you come back to the plenary. So I will share the links right now in the chat box, and off we go. So everyone, we had very limited time. I know the time was short and some groups were just getting started with their sharing, but I think for the sake of time, we should get started. Can we each share for about 1 minute what the highlights were in our group? We can even share our screens per group because participants should have that option. So from group 1, would anyone like to, from our group, I was in that group, could anyone share the screen and briefly talk about some of the key points? Maybe Leah or Keba or Joyce or even Anna.
Yeah, let's get the screens here and I'll take us through.
Okay, I can share my screen if no one else. Please go ahead and take us through.
Thank you very much. Group 1. critical components necessary for successful scale-up. We actually looked at tapping into experiences and structures that already exist so that we can scale up. And it's also important that we have data, which is relating to the baseline data and assessment reports or research that would inform the scale up successful. The government look for. We are looking at the feasibility of it being for it to be possible in terms of the geographical area and coverage, which is very, very important. And the national teacher standard should also be looked at if you look at it for incentive, because we're talking of the Ghana experience like a carrot and a stick situation. What would actually happen when you want to actually scale up the program, which is very, very important. The existing structures, like we said, infrastructure and structures, which is very, very important. So thank you very much. Over.
Thank
Any
you,
other
Kevin.
thing from the members? Members, please, would you want to add anything in case I miss out anything? Over.
I think the points are visible and they are clear. You've done your best. That will be it.
So this is Olive. I'm still insisting on teacher participation, even when the government wants to implement a certain model and also to scale up teacher participation. Otherwise, we just resisting.
Right. I think we can go to group 2 now. There's obviously going to be a lot of similar points, but also hopefully something that's distinct, like you brought up, Olive, a distinct new point. So could we have group 2 share for about 1 minute their key highlights?
Actually, you can share your screen and then we can have our note taker go through, or do you want me to run through it? Yeah.
Please go through it, Abdul.
So yes, on the first question, we had around sustainability, cost and size going in line with cost. And we thought that development of policies that drive the change is also a critical component. The personnel have the right people dedicated to the scale up, and assessment feedback. I mean, such scale up should have very good assessment, feedback, and reflection component. We looked at equity, ensuring that the scale up considers this. Quality and efficiency of the program needs to be considered as well. And so for 2, what should the government look for? We thought that it can be, the program should be sustainable. Is the program collaborative? Does it meet the national standards, align with national priorities? And this is where, you know, time could just permit us to come up with ideas. Yeah, over.
Thank you so much, Abdul. Can we have group 3 share for about 1 minute?
Yes, some of the things have been talked about, but we also looked at infrastructure, a strong policy and legal framework, then strengthening research and innovation and development. Then what should your government look for? We said programs with the highest impact in achieving government objectives. Then we should also consider equity issues and cost efficiency. And then I think that's where we ended because time ran out.
Thanks, Lola. You still have a little bit of time left. Does anybody from group 3 want to share another point?
Maybe my group members would share.
Yeah, thanks. This is Devyani. I think I had a point around sustainability or ease of sustainability of or integration of the effort or the initiative into existing government systems as another point that government should look at when deciding what to take up.
And Devyani, could you elaborate on why you think that's important? We have a lot of government members with us today. Could you just like briefly, like why that's necessary or important for scaling up?
Yeah. Thanks, Marianne. So I think what we've seen with our experience with teaching at the right level, first in India, and then as we are expanding, especially with governments in Africa, is that if you're building parallel systems which cannot be integrated or are not thinking about sustainability and integration from the start, you can often end up in a situation where things survive as projects or for the duration of that intensive support or focus, but then fizzle out. And when we're talking about things like teacher professional development or innovative strategies that support implementation by teachers in the classroom, I'm sure we would all agree that most government systems want to be able to implement these in the long run. So I think what we've tried to do with teaching at the right level, at least, is try to think about scalability and integration right from the beginning. And this, of course, takes into account cost as well, but also looking at capacities and structures within the system and how these activities can be built into those existing structures or systems, leveraging as much what's already in place, as opposed to replicating and building parallel structures.
Excellent. Thank you, Devyani, for expanding on that. It's a great point. It was also brought up in group 1 too. Could we have group 4 share for about 1 minute what they took away from the discussion?
This is group 4. We didn't really finish, but in relation to 1, we talk about government taking a bottom-up approach. Many times it's top-down, and we are saying there's need to start this from the bottom. And we also talked about government will and that of policy makers in whatever is being scaled up. And of course, government will lead to location of resources that will be required for implementation. And we also talked about freeing teachers' time. Many times we expect teachers to do things, but we don't free their time. If they're supposed to participate in TPD, can we say 1 day in a month, children are not there and they do their work? Then teacher participation, we also said is extremely important in all activities that are being planned and scaled up, and incentive for teachers as well. Now, in terms of number 2, we were talking about context. We said context matters for any reforms or any interventions that are going to be put in place. And therefore, there's need normally to first do a study of what is required in a locality, and then you implement an appropriate program for that locality. Thank you. Members of Group 4, if I've left out something, you can add. I think that is all, Marianne.
Thank you, Betty, so much. I see that Grace has unmuted herself. Grace, did you have a point to share? Okay, Betty, thank you for sharing from your group. I take note of one of your points about contextualization and adapting to the local context. I think we've seen that as a theme today. And I would like to ask if there's anybody who has any final thoughts, anything to share before I let Yvonne from my team conclude and wrap up. There was also a good point in the chat box from Alpha, who's no longer in the session right now, but he said that it's important to involve the community, involving parents and the wider community beyond their traditional roles in the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association. So I thought that was a valid point that needed to be raised. You might have already seen it in the chat box. So we have just a couple of minutes. I'd like to make this an open platform now We've had so many excellent questions in the chat box, really fantastic points that you brought up. We could have another hour and just barely get to some of them. But would anyone like to elaborate on a point or ask a new question or share something that hasn't been mentioned yet? You can just jump right in, no need to raise your hands.
Thank you very much. This is Keva from the Gambia. Also to elaborate and underpin Alpha's statement, because in terms of scaling up any activity or program, it is very, very important that we have that community participation aspect of it for sustainability and also for transparency and accountability. At the end of the day, we are working for and with the children. What we all want is for the attainment of quality, inclusive, accessible education for all. So, which I think I want to also join you to commend Alpha for that excellent point. Thank you very much. Over.
Also to add to the points made just now, and that for sustainability, sometimes from experience, what can we sustain? Maybe government will need to begin to look at exactly what they can sustain, and we as supporters and providers and technical support in terms of not all can be sustained. So at least maybe starting from a snowball approach, a small, and then from there, the government can continue to move on because of budget issues and because of release of budgeted allocations. These need to be considered anytime we are designing and planning for sustainability and scalability. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Nora. Anyone else? These are excellent points. If there are no more points from the participants, the members of the community of practice, then I would ask if there's any final thoughts or observations from our presenters today, anything that you'd like to remind us of, any final thoughts?
Ashley, do you want to start?
No, go ahead, Ethel.
Okay, great. No, just to thank everybody for your time. We are all learning, as you could see, it's still a learning process for us, even in Ghana. And so feel free to get in touch if there are any countries that are also interested in testing and piloting and trying to also learn. I think we have a huge resource here, even with our community of practice. And please get in touch and we can talk more and discuss how we can work together for generally improving learning outcomes across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethel, and we look forward to keeping you connected to the community of practice. Like these discussions, as you've seen today, they've just begun. They have not in any way concluded or ended. And we also look forward to learning more about World Reader. If there's new emerging findings, we'd like to continue learning from your project as well. Anyone from TARL want to just give a final observation or thought that you'd like us to leave with today?
Thank you so much, Marianne. And thank you so much for the opportunity to engage today. It's been a really interesting conversation. And I think similarly to Ethel, if anyone is interested in learning more about teaching at the right level, please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to engage and hopefully can continue to engage in this community as well. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks to the entire teams from TARL and from World Reader today. Yvonne, would you like to mention the survey that you posted in the chat box? Over to you.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you everyone for participating. We are kindly requesting that you take a few minutes just to answer the questions from our survey. And I think Marianne has just posted at least some of the questions that are there. I would like to know which countries' experiences are curricular policies seem to be closest to you, to your own. and also which countries are you interested in learning from. We're also looking at you just telling us a way forward as a community of practice. Which way do you want us to go? So we're looking for that guidance from the members of the community of practice, so that you will be able to tell us this is what we want to happen next. We do not want to be the ones controlling it. We are giving you control. Just tell us what do you want the hub to focus on going forward. So just take, it will only take about less than 10 minutes, about 7 minutes to fill that. And we'll be glad to have your feedback, and we work on it. As you have seen from the previous sessions, we always take what you tell us, what you give us, and provide what you request. So we are here to support you. Just tell us what you want us to do next. Thank you. Back to you, Marianne.
Thanks, Yvonne. I think that was really great. You said it so clearly. So we look forward to continuing with everybody. This is the last of the first 6 sessions, but now that we're all in touch, we're all a network, we know who each other, we know who's in this community right now. There's going to be other follow-up activities in the near future. So as Yvonne pointed out so eloquently, we'd like to learn from you what we should do next. Okay, so please do take the survey. We always read your responses, and we're so looking forward to seeing you back at future activities. And you know that we will be issuing certificates for those members who attended 5 out of the 6 sessions. If you feel in any way that you were not able to attend one, but you really wanted to, but because of internet connectivity, it wasn't possible for you, you can also reach out to us and let us know if we should consider any special circumstances in your case. But we were going to look at participation as 5 out of 6 of the workshops. So thank you so much for taking part. You are the community of practice. It's not a workshop, it's not a facilitator, it's not a presenter, it's you. And with that, I'd like to conclude and just thank you so much for taking part, and stay tuned for future activities. We are looking forward to working with you. I do have some music I want to play for. And if I could ask the teams from Tarl and from World Reader to stick around for a few minutes, please, so we can reflect on how today went, that'd be great.
Thank you, and bye-bye for now.
Badu